Well, hello there, good morning. Welcome to Lingfield Park. Good start, it's good afternoon actually, and it's our Discover Racing Family Fun Day here today. You're going to hear from some people you don't normally hear from. I have to put up with them all the time, but you don't normally get to hear from these people. And also you're going to get to see some things during the day that you don't normally get to see. So let me introduce our panel for this little Q&A session here. We have Sam Angel, steward for the BHA, stipendiary steward to be correct. Along here we have Felix Wheeler, a judge for the BHA, judges the races. We'll find out more shortly. Brian York, who for a million years has been a jockey's valet, looks after all the jockeys and their equipment and all that sort of stuff. Graham Ford, clerk of the scales. He runs the weighing room with a rod of iron. And just here on the end is James Stenning, the starter. So we'll start with you, James, actually. Now, the starter, the most important thing to note here is there are two very different types of start to a race. National Hunt Racing, you line up behind a piece of string, effectively. For flat races, you've got to get the horses into the stalls. I presume two very different disciplines for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the starting stalls is a lot more technical. We've got a lot more history on those horses. A flip start for the National Hunt Racing is, as it says, they're supposed to walk in at quite a nice, sedate pace, and if we're happy with that start, we'll let them go. Whereas the starting stalls, obviously some horses have got history on them where they're not very well behaved or claustrophobic in there, and we've got a history list of those, and we work from the draw on the day to arrange the safe loading of the horses as quickly as possible.
I presume today is a day you're very happy to be at Lingfield. How would you fancy being at Aintree, trying to get 40 of them to line up for the Grand National?
I'll take Lingfield every day, I think. Now, Liverpool would be great to be there, but yeah, I would prefer. I like Lingfield, so yeah, it's my local track. So
we love having you here, James. We love having you here. Now, next to James is Graham Ford, who today is acting as the clerk of the scales. One of those jobs you think, how on earth do I get that?
Well, basically it was just advertised in the paper, so I applied and boom.
Which newspaper was that?
Amazingly enough, that was the Racing Post.
Now, we always think of the stewards as being in charge of the day, but actually the clerk of the scales, you are pretty much in charge of that weighing room.
Yeah, we sort of run it. Everyone that comes in and out, everyone declaring, and who films in there, what goes on. We just keep an eye on everything, really.
And you have to weigh out the jockeys, you have to weigh them back in. And, of course, we can get problems if someone comes in with a different weight to how they went out.
Yeah, obviously if they've lost weight, if they've lost more than a pound, they're disqualified instantly. If they've carried more than £2 extra, obviously they're sort of defrauding the punters to an extent, so they'll get a ban. They're not disqualified because obviously they've carried more weight.
And you're also making sure they've got the right equipment. Should the horse be wearing blinkers? And, of course, you need to check whip sometimes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we've got to check they've got the correct whip. Certain ones would have a longer shaft. Obviously, it's going to hit a bit harder when they come back from America or overseas. They might have different equipment in their hands. So we're also checking their safety equipment, their helmets, their safety vests, that kind of thing.
Okie dokie, so that is Graham, clerk of the scales here at Lingfield today. Now, next door is a man with a huge amount of experience. Did we do a presentation to you? Was it last year, Brian, for how many years service?
It was 51 last year, so it's 52 now.
My word, 52 years. Brian York here is a jockey's valet, so you're looking after them. The clerk of the scales makes sure they're behaving and they've got all the right equipment, and you're responsible for making sure they have that equipment in the first place.
Yes, we transport it from meeting to meeting and then hang it up and try and get the right equipment out to the clerk of the scales in time for the races.
Now, talking about 52 years, it's your birthday today, is that right?
It is, Steve, yes, yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say how old, but if you can do maths, you'll work this out. So you were 17 when you started, is that right?
Yeah.
Brian has been doing this forever then, more than half a century. How did you start with this?
Sorry?
How did you start in this?
Taken on from my father, and he took over from my grandfather, so it's been a family business since about 1916, I think.
And looked after some legends in that time. You were telling me, well, just a couple of weeks ago, but Lester Piggott.
Yes, Lester Piggott, Steve Cawthon, Cash Asmussen, Mice Roberts, they've all been through the mill, and now it's Ryan Moore, Dane O'Neill's, people like that now. So.
And you need plenty of good people to help you out and carry bags from one meeting to another, yeah, without payment. Now, Felix Wheeler is the judge on the day. I think it's a job that pretty much does what it says on the tin in terms of judging races.
Well, you hand over to the commentator, he calls them down to post and calls the race, and then the next voice you hear is me announcing the result. And I do that with a Mark 1 eyeball and a piece of string.
And that's all you have, no computers or anything like that.
I have two cameras and a computer, and the cameras record every single horse that crosses the line and then converts the time interval between each horse into a distance.
This can be a thankless job, this. When we have a really, really tight finish, we're talking about a nose or something like that. People say, they look at these prints, don't they, that you look at and say, how did you call that in that direction?
Well, I have a magnifying glass and I have the best cameras on the face of the planet, so it's very clear to me.
And the best eyesight on the planet too.
Yeah, I hope so.
There are no glasses on, you notice that. But a man who has got glasses, if I just swing round here, I can take a seat again now, is Sam Angel, who is a stipendiary steward for the BHA. So we talked about all these people who are in charge of this and that. You're pretty much in charge of the race rules.
Yeah, exactly that. Any rules on the day that we make sure they're adhered to, and if they're not, an inquiry is held.
So what is the process for a steward's inquiry? It's not just you in that steward's room, there are several others. You see something in a race you don't like, you then call a steward's inquiry. What happens after that?
Okay, jockeys or trainers, whoever's been involved, they come into the inquiry, give evidence, and there's a panel that's two honorary stewards and myself, a stipendiary, and we, yeah.
You have that horrible job as well, don't you, of dishing out bans to jockeys?
We do, yes, unfortunately. It is part of the job, or fines.
And you're quite new to this, aren't you? You haven't been around too many years. I mean, I seem to remember when I first started, Brian will definitely remember this, the old army majors and colonels used to run the steward's room. It's slightly different these days.
Yeah, it is slightly different. I come in as a graduate trainee 4 years ago.
And you also now have former jockeys part of that stewards panel too.
There are several of the stipes that are ex-jockeys.
Now, one thing we need to know from all of you actually is, if you weren't here today or any race meeting, if you weren't here, if there were no stewards turned up, no stipendiary stewards turned up, could this race meeting go ahead?
It would struggle, I have to be honest.
It would struggle. There we go. If the judge isn't here, could we race, Felix?
Well, if the stipendiary stewards turned up, they could do my job, but they probably wouldn't want to.
They probably wouldn't. Now, if we didn't have a jockey's valet here and they had to sort of wash their own stuff, Brian, my goodness me, what would happen then?
If the equipment was here, they'd get by. Racing might run a little bit later, but they'd get by without us. But I like to think we make the meeting go smoothly anyway.
You certainly do. And down here, Brian, you've got just a little bit of equipment. You've got a saddle down here that you're just going to show us some of the stuff that the jockeys' valets are responsible for here, because mostly jockeys just turn up and everything's here for them. So what have we got here, Brian?
That is a light saddle. So the heavier the jockey, the lighter the saddle that he would use. So which is not very big. Go on the side of your settees and whatnot for a cigarette ashtray. And they would gradually go up through the scale and use that one. And if that's not heavy enough, they use one of those. And then we would, which is a weight cloth, and then we start adding lead and run it right down to quarter pounds. But then we hope the clerk of the scale says, excuse me, says that it's the correct weight.
So there you go, you've got your saddles, so you've got your lead as well. So if a jockey is not heavy enough for his or her mounts, the lead goes in. Some of us have never had to worry about lead in our saddles. And if the clerk of the scales isn't here, I think that's it, isn't it? We can't race without you.
Well, the stipes could do the job if I wasn't here, but obviously if they weren't here, we'd struggle, because it's all about the integrity, really, of the results. And horse racing is all about weight, to be honest. So that's how the handicapping system works. So there'd be a few coups pulled off if I wasn't there, I think.
Ooh, a few coups. Those are the old days. Now, it seems to me that the stipes can step in and start anything if everyone else is not here. What about starting a race?
Yeah, they could start the races if we weren't here, but as we've normally got two starters, that would be a highly unlikely occurrence.
Okay, someone gets stuck in traffic.
Yeah, possibly, yeah, they would have to start the race, yeah.
Okay, so it seems to me that we've got our starter here. If he's not here, the Stipes could step in. We have our clerk of the scales. If the clerk of the scales is not here, the Stipes could step in. If Brian's not here, racing will die. And if Felix is not here, the Stipes could step in. So if the Stipes aren't here, Sam, basically it's Armageddon.
Would get by.
We would get by is the message. Can I just say thank you here to our panel. We've heard from Sam Angel, stipendiary steward, Felix Wheeler, judge, Brian York, 52 years service now, everybody, by the way. Raise your back, Brian, that is some innings. Jockey's valet, Graham Ford, clerk of the scales, and James Stenning, starter, all of whom are going to be in action for our 7 races here at Lingfield today.